Hello everyone and welcome to this demo lesson. First I want to introduce myself. I'm Sir Mika or Mike Tynjälä. I'm 45 years old and originally from Finland in Northern Europe. I have been an immigrant twice during my life. First in my distant youth from 1987 to 1993 in Canada, and then since November 2014 here in the Philippines, more specifically in Muntinlupa City, Metro Manila. I have over 11 years of teaching experience, including over 2 years here in the Philippines. And I have been assigned the following topic: to analyze one love poem written by the late Chilean poet Mr. Pablo Neruda. That was actually not his original name. His original name was Ricardo Reyes, but he used that as a so-called pen name and eventually then made it his official name. So just as an icebreaker, I'm going to sing for you this Finnish love poem and song, The Happy Ones. Because it can also be song. Poems can also be songs. It was written in the late 19th century by one of the most famous Finnish writers, Mr. Alexis Kivi, who was a contemporary of Mark Twain, that famous American novelist. However, contrary to Twain, he never achieved fame or fortune during his brief life. And it was composed by one of Finland's most famous classical composers of the late 19th and early 20th centuries, Mr. Oscar Merikanto. The poem is a light-hearted, romantic poem, however, a fairly traditional one. And it's fitting for the season because now it is summer in Finland. And this is my nearly literal translation of the lyrics. Already lights up the distant shore, and from northeast the sun rises, and hazes hasten away. When bellows of north are pumped, when gone is the night, when glistens summer morning, and birds they sing. I step to a high mountain summit, now in a fresh wind. My hope's morning dawn, my darling I will meet there. When gone is the night, when glistens summer morning, and birds they sing. Here with my lady I stand now, and our curls wave in the wind, and humming of valleys rings like voice of eternal love. When gone is the night, when glistens summer morning, and birds they sing. So as you can notice, poems can also be composed into songs, and especially in the earlier centuries, many poems have been so composed. Of course, the traditional poems had one advantage over especially the most postmodern poems, namely that they were rhymed. The postmodern poems often sound like prose, except that they have been arranged into stanzas like the traditional poems. So what I'm going to read to you, recite to you, and then analyze with you is actually a shortened version of the full poem.
Question for the class. What's their favorite?
Yes. Then some warm-up questions here. Do you have a favorite poem? Why or why not? And then secondly, if you have a favorite poem, what is it? And then thirdly, going deeper into that analysis, why is that poem your favorite? And then the last one, requiring a bit deeper thinking still, what do you generally like about poetry, or do you dislike poems? And please explain briefly why. And then the main... Yes. Yeah. Then the main character of this demo lesson, Mr. Pablo Neruda, or originally Ricardo Reyes. He was born in 1904 and died in 1973. During that 69-year lifespan, he had 3 careers. He was a poet, a diplomat, and a politician. So those of you who are familiar with the Philippine culture and various other Asian cultures probably can easily answer the following question. For what 2 reasons would Mr. Neruda, if he had lived, for example, here in the Philippines or in quite many other Asian countries, not have probably received a national poetry prize, or at least would have had many critics? One had to do with his political affiliation. The other reason had to do with his religious beliefs, or rather his lack of religious beliefs. For one thing, since the Spanish Civil War in the late 1930s, he was a committed communist. Because of that, he even had to spend 3 years in exile, from 1948 to 1951. And then for another fact, he was a self-confessed atheist. In other words, he did not believe in God. And in many Asian countries, as we know, while of course there have been communists for decades, communism nevertheless has been opposed by many people. And then in many, probably still most Asian countries, religiosity, at least on the basic level of believing in God or in some other higher being, has been respected and considered one of the characteristics of decent citizens. And it seems that Mr. Neruda did not mind offending the traditionally minded people, even among the readers of poetry, and that's why he had both many critics and many admirers in Chile and elsewhere. Already in 1917, so at the age of 13, he started to publish his written works, mostly poems and essays. And then in the late 1920s, he became a diplomat. He actually was in a desperate need for some steady career because, as many writers have found before him and even after him, it's quite difficult to make a living solely or only by writing, in his case poems and essays. Then he had a colorful private life with 3 wives. The first one was a Dutch woman, the second one was an Argentinian woman, interestingly 20 years older than he, and the third and last one was a Chilean woman. He only fathered 1 child, a girl who unfortunately was born with a disorder in her head, too much water, the so-called hydrocephalic disorder, and who then died during the Second World War at the age of 8 when staying in the German-occupied Netherlands with her mother. By that time, her parents had already got divorced. And interestingly enough, when recovering from phlebitis, which is a disease of veins, blood vessels, Mr. Neruda met his third wife while still being legally married to his second wife. They started that affair. The second wife found out about it, and Neruda and she got divorced, and then Neruda could marry his third and last wife. Despite his controversial works and image, in 1971 he was able to get the prestigious Nobel Prize for Literature. And that came less than 2 years before his death, in September 1973, shortly after the Chilean army had overthrown the socialist president Salvador Allende, whose close friend and advisor Mr. Neruda had been. He himself died of prostate cancer and possibly of poisoning. But let's now go to the actual lesson. We have the following objectives: to analyze one of Mr. Neruda's love poems. Every Day You Play is the title. Secondly, to explore his poetic imagery, meaning figures of speech used to describe people, other living beings, places, ideas, etc. in poems. Third, to encourage and enable the students to understand various ways of describing love through poetry. And fourth and last, to find and appreciate some possible personal and social allusions in poetry. And then the expected learning outcomes: the students will identify the basic outline of Mr. Neruda's life. Then the students will recognize and appreciate the imagery used in this love poem. Third, the students will acquire different ways to express love in poetry. And fourth and last, the students will grasp and appreciate social contexts of love poems. Actually, what I'm going to recite and then analyze with you is a shortened version of the full poem. It's available, of course, in the original Spanish and then also in English. I found this shortened version in the website, or on the website, https://the-most-famous-Pablo-Neruda and /. Every day you play, you are here. Oh, you do not run away. You will answer me to the last cry. Curl round me as though you were frightened. Even so, a strange shadow once ran through your eyes. Now too, little one, you bring me honeysuckle, and even your breasts smell of it. While the sad wind goes slaughtering butterflies, I love you, and my happiness bites the plum of your mouth. Now you must have suffered getting accustomed to me, my savage, solitary soul, my name that sends them all running. So many times we have seen the morning star burn, kissing our eyes, and over our heads the grey light unwinds in turning fans. My words reigned over you, stroking you. A long time I have loved the sunned mother of pearl of your body, until I even believe that you own the universe. I will bring you happy flowers from the mountains, bluebells, dark hazels, and rustic baskets of kisses. I want to do with you what spring does with the cherry trees. So already the poem's title implies that Mr. Neruda had difficulty believing in serious and lasting love. After all, as I mentioned, he was married 3 times. And only his last marriage then lasted until his death. The poem's first stanza expresses appreciation of his girlfriend's or wife's faithfulness, at least in the poet's imagination and hopes. You do not run away. On the other hand, his girlfriend or wife seems fearful and vulnerable. Curl around me as if you were frightened. So question 1 for you. What could the strange shadow be that once had run through Mr. Neruda's girlfriend's or wife's face? And remember, in these questions there is no such thing as a single right answer or a single wrong answer. Poems are that part of literature which is open to many different interpretations, as long as you can creatively and, if necessary, intelligently justify your answers. Yes? Mr. Neruda switches this poem's tone to fatherly tenderness in the second stanza, my little one. He indirectly compares his mistress or wife with an animal, while contrasting their safety with the butterfly's death in the windy weather. Moreover, Mr. Neruda declares his love for the woman and figuratively compares her mouth to a fruit. So, my second question for you: what animal does Mr. Neruda compare his girlfriend or wife with, and why do you think so? Yes. Do you have any guesses? Yeah. And then question 3, why does he write as if his girlfriend's mouth was a plum which his happiness bites? And one clue, of course, is that plums, like several or many other fruits, are juicy. So people don't just eat them, but also consume or drink their juices. So any guesses on that one? Then in this shortened poem's third stanza, Mr. Neruda tries to comfort his girlfriend or wife by implying that she truly has gone out of her way to love him, so that she has accepted all his character flaws, all his unpopularity, his failed previous relationships. Mr. Neruda even seems to make fun of his name by claiming that people run away from him because of his name. So this girlfriend, mistress, wife, call her what you will or who you will, really seems to love him unconditionally with all her heart. Curiously, instead of praising his girlfriend or wife for kissing him, he figuratively claims that the morning star has kissed their eyes. In other words, that they have watched the dawn outside together. And he even says that, or writes that the gray morning light resembles, in his opinion, turning feathers or sails, meaning fans. Well, because the Philippines is a tropical country, here we have to have a lot of fans. And even in Chile, especially when the summer season is on, approximately from December to February, they do need a lot of fans because it's hot. But Chile, contrary to the Philippines, has still a four-season climate, including even the winter season, which is actually currently going on in Chile. So question 4, why does Mr. Neruda describe himself so negatively in this stanza? So what would you guess? And related to that, question 5, do you think that his self-criticism is honest or designed to please his girlfriend or wife? Please explain your answers briefly. Yeah, just like we people in general, poets can also say or write things that they don't really mean, or things that have double or even multiple meanings, depending on the layers of meaning and depending on the interpretations. Then, in this poem's fourth and last stanza, Mr. Neruda focuses on describing his love for his girlfriend or wife in naturalistic, biological, and seasonal terms. And the season that he mentions is spring. In Chile, it lasts approximately from September to November, because Chile is so far to the south of the equator that the seasons compared to North America, Europe, and Central and Northern Asia are reversed. And then he even compares his girlfriend's or wife's body to a shell, mother of pearl, and jokingly claims that she owns the universe. As if she was not only his girlfriend or wife, but also a goddess, he promises to bring her flowers as gifts. And this, of course, is interesting given the fact that Mr. Neruda was an atheist. But it seems that as a poet he could use even, let's say, slightly or somewhat religious images, or allude to them, despite the fact that he did not believe in God or any higher beings. At the poem's very end, he implies that he wants to express his love for her also physically. So question 6, why does Mr. Neruda praise his girlfriend or wife so naturalistically in this poem's final stanza? It has to do with the processes of growth. The flowers, trees, other plants grow and blossom. Then question 7. For what possible reasons does he compare his girlfriend's or wife's body to a shell? The clue is, what are shells like? What do they contain? The shells that you can easily see or even pick, especially on the seashores. And Chile, of course, has a long coastline on the Pacific Ocean. And finally, question 8, what kind of image of fertility is there on the poem's last 2 lines? And then after those questions, some other class activities or exercises. Form a group of 4, choose a representative or spokesperson and scribe. At the end of the discussion per group, the representative will share a summary of the group discussion. 1. What kinds of love poems do you like and why? 2. Is this kind of love poem pleasant, annoying, mediocre, or boring for you? Please explain briefly why. 3. Mr. Neruda was married 3 times, but he only had 1 child, a disabled daughter who died at the age of 8. In what ways do you think that these personal tragedies influenced this poem's tone? And finally, 4. How powerfully and creatively does nature serve as a source of love images compared to, for example, cities or technological devices, which of course would be for us, early 21st century people, um, somehow more concrete or more immediate sources of images than trees and flowers and grass. And why do you think so? And finally, assignments or homework. 1. How does a poet's personal success in his or her dating relationships and marriage influence his or her love poems? And then this word success I have put in quotation marks because it's ironical. Then 2. What life experiences of Mr. Neruda made him both crave for and yet doubt the permanence of love, and why? Then 3. Discuss some factors in Mr. Neruda's life which made him a social critic, also as a poet. And at last, how well does Mr. Neruda, in your opinion, reflect his life and times in his love poems? Thank you so much for your attention and participation, and hopefully we'll see you again soon.
Okay, feedback.
Yeah.
Your voice